As our network is established, we're going to want to do a few things for maintenance sake. We're going to go ahead and start span equalization, but before we do that, we're going to equalize from our ROADMs, just so that we can see what the process is first. When we decide to equalize our network, we want to make certain that we understand a couple of basic principles. When the ADVA ROADMs equalize their process, their equalization takes place on the network egress interface of each of their ROADMs, and only from the network egress. What this means is I can equalize my channels as they are leaving this point. I can equalize my channels here as they are leaving this point, and equalize them as they are leaving this point, and then finally as they're leaving here and leaving here. Over here there are no ROADMs, which means any equalization I do from this point would have to be manual. I can also span equalize, in which the machine will actually navigate the ADVAs, manage them in order to equalize the channels that are leaving my site. So when we want to equalize, we always want to start off from our greatest source of light, going towards one direction of our network, and then of course following backwards in one direction at a time. You do not want to equalize two different directions at the same time. And so if we look at our network here, we start off, we have three channels entering here. These three channels are hitting this ROADM. They hit this ROADM from the network ingress, but there's nothing we can do with the network ingress. It hits that ROADM, however, that light is now hitting this port, leaving this ROADM, out to this ROADM, and leaving this ROADM, heading down to this third ROADM. What this means is the first point of equalization is where that greatest source of light is hitting first. So then I need to equalize ROADM number 2 and ROADM number 3 first. Following up in that same direction, I need to equalize ROADM number 2 of site 3, and then the return path, ROADM number 1 at site 3 and ROADM number 1 at site 2. To do that from the NMS, we have to keep stock of our nodes. So once again, reviewing the diagram, site number 2, ROADM 2 and 3. So at site 2, which is Enterprise, Element Manager, we wait for it. Now we have our alarm status. We go to ROADM number 2. We go to the network interface of ROADM number 2. We only want to be in the optical module itself. We go to Operation, and we operate. This starts that equalization process at the network egress of ROADM number 2. Secondly, we go to the ROADM number 3, and we do the same thing. At the network optical module, we operate it. Because I set those path node information from earlier, for each one of these, both ROADMs will not actually equalize at exactly the same time, but there will in fact be a delay between the two ROADMs. So when one is ready, the other one will continue. Following in this direction that we're going, we need to go to site number 3. And so we wait for it. We want ROADM number 2 of site number 3, and then we'll return with ROADM number 1 of site number 3. So here's ROADM number 2 of site 3, into the network optical module, and we operate. and then ROADM number 1 of site number 3. We operate it, and then finally we return back to site number 2. At ROADM number 1 of site number 2. We can also do what's called span equalization. So we've initiated it from our ROADMs. We're going to give it a few moments. To do it for the span equalization process inherits the set point and required information for equalization from the ROADMs. To get to that process, we need to go back to the node and we right-click on the node's name. Once we've right-clicked on the node's name, we need to locate span equalization right here. Now, for this process to work successfully, it is absolutely imperative that you have an NTP server already running on your network. Now, something that I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to disable one minor alarm that's kind of hanging around in the background of our shelves. So I'm going to take on that task now while I can. And that's simply because I've got a couple of nodes that only have a single power supply, and the default condition of the shelf is to maintain those power supplies. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of a modification here. So I'm going to quickly divert across to this. Equipment alarm profile. And what I'm looking for is missing power supply, or missing power unit. Want to modify this value and make it not reported. Or simply not alarmed. And then we hit severity resync to bring the shelf back into a state of calm with that particular issue. And I want to do that same thing for each of my nodes. So here I'm Enterprise, then at the Pillar of Autumn. We of course have other alarms on our shelves, but Enterprise should not be giving us any alarm right now, so let's double check it. Optical power received too low. Let's quickly check that light level. It says the neg 18.2. So let's see if we can't quickly correct that. Now I quickly corrected this issue. See if we can't make this card happy. That card is now happy. Now, the way I resolve this particular issue is by reducing some of the attenuation that was hitting the preamp, that's in turn feeding that 4TCC card that was an alarm. So we've quickly resolved. So as we're troubleshooting here, this one's no longer taking hits, so we can change this one as well. Now we can start the node span equalization process. We've done our equalization for the ROTEMs, and so now we can do equalization from the span standpoint. The values are going to be adopted from each of the ROTEMs. And so I'm going to start off with site 1, the first site. First thing I'll do is I'll right click on the node and I'll locate span equalization. And the first thing I need to do is qualify them. So I'll hit modify, configuration, qualify only, and I OK it. This lets the machine know, or lets me know, that it understands where my pre and post amps are. I want to do the same thing for each of the other nodes as well. Span equalization, modify, qualify only, tell me what my EDFAs are doing. And then of course I do the same thing for all 3 nodes. Span equalization, modify, qualify only. And so it gave its own default expected value. However, these were adopted from what the ROTEMs are currently set at in those respective nodes. Now that I've marked qualify only, I'll go back and I will change that qualify only to calculate gain or adopt gain. I'm going to start with calculate gain, and I OK it. And I do so with each one of my options here for each one of these sites. And then I start the automated equalization process by going back and enabling and closing out. So now the nodes are on the road to troubleshooting themselves. Right away, I've got a loss of signal on one of my cards. It means that at some point this has tilted itself off the scale. Neg 24. So Galactica, or Site 1, it looks a bit unhappy. So now we can troubleshoot relative to the span equalization. So I will check my current conditions on that shelf. Optical power received too low at 113 network. 113 network is a 4TCC card. 113 network, the 4TCC card, is being fed by the 40 CSM by the ADVA at 151. So then I want to look at that ADVA at 151. ADVA is getting an acceptable amount of power, and it's kicking out a 9.9 dB. That 9.9 dB is hitting a 40 CSM. That 40 CSM is sending to a 4 TCC. So then the question becomes, what light level am I getting at the 4 TCC at 113? .3. So it's a little too low, and that's what's giving us that value. So I'm going to get a check on it real quick here. 19 network. It's getting a positive 1.1, which is a little hot actually. Remove the pad here and place the pad there. And so that should give us better light levels. Now our threshold crossing alerts, we're going to have to go after those as well. But that's all that we have left. It's telling us at the ODU and OTU layer and at our severely erred second, so even at the sonnet sublayer we had issues. So let's get a look and see if we're still taking hits. ODU layer, no longer taking hits. Cleared. FEC sublayer, not taking hits at all. OTU layer, not taking hits. So we should be clear. So 19 is clean. Moving further down here to 113 network. It was taking hits, ODU, FEC, and OTU too. So ODU, no longer taking hits. OTU sublayer, not taking hits. Not taking hits. Power received, neg 3.9. A little on the warm side, but we're all green. This node is now happy. And it's dynamically span equalizing. Let's see if we can bring this light level down a little bit. This is neg 3.9 from a 1.0. That's only 2 dB off of the hot threshold. Not even 2 dB. So let's see if we can bring that down just a little bit. So 113 network at Galactica, or Site 1. Nice and green. Site 2 is also nice and green. So we're now span equalizing, and we're nice and green. So auto span equalization is now running with no flaws, no troubles whatsoever, and it's dynamically recalculating. So essentially the network is now troubleshooting itself. It's running perfectly well, or at least as well as it can at the moment. We are still looking at some issues on Site 1. Span equalization is running just fine. However, we've got some minor issues we need to troubleshoot within the box, within the node. So we're going after those right now. ADVA says it's happy, but we've got an amber. Transmit power is limited, it says. So this means that at Site 3, ADVA at 141 may be a little too hot, actually. So whenever you see this and this together, it suggests that we may either have a hot or something that's not connected. So I'm going to check in two places. Mid-stage is connected correctly. Mid-stage transmit is transmitting correctly. The receive is fine. Let's go back to 141. Well, actually that was the first stage, my mistake. The mid-stage is receiving 3, transmitting 3.7. VOA attenuation there is stable at 6 dB. Attenuation between stages is 0.1. So this appears to be a relatively happy EDFA. However, the conditions that we're still looking at are still quite interesting. And that will be these four guys right here. So let's see what we can do with that power level. What's going in the door is neg 13, and we probably need to bring it down at least a couple more dB. One four one. Pillar of Autumn. I've placed a 2 dB pad onto the Pillar of Autumn. That ADVA is now happy with that 2 additional dB of padding. And so now we are green on that ADVA. Moving further in, I'm looking at the network interface here, but let's go look at the other ADVA at 117.1. Transmit power is limited, gain tilt not settable. Looks like it may be up against the same problem as the previous ADVA we were just on. Our receive power, however, is a neg 20. So the fault that we're looking at here still appears to be a mid-stage fault on this end. So let me back the light down on this one just a little bit, and we'll see what we can do. This ADVA is at 117.1, same shelf. I've added an additional 4 dB pad to it. That ADVA appears to have gone normal, but we'll see in a few seconds. There it is. So it's gone clean now as well. So now the only remaining factor that we have against us is this 1.8 channel card. This would be our WCC card at its network interface. This card suggests that it's in an outage state right now, telling us that we really have no idea how much light is actually hitting that card. In an outage state, it suggests that no light is hitting that card at all. So we'll need to get a look at that light level. And since we can't get that information from here, we should review our topology. So 1.8 network is this guy right here. He's getting his light from the 40 CSM. 40 CSM is not going to tell us anything because it's passive. So then it's getting its light from the ROADM at 112 at its client interface. That one will be coming in from the network interface. So then what we need to do is look for the light level that's hitting here and that's leaving here. And so the light level leaving that ROADM at ROADM 2, that's going to be 112 client, and the channel that's feeding that card is D02 or C1. So looking at that ROTAM, this guy right here is at light level. So it's leaving that ROTAM at a neg 16.9. It's being received by that ROTAM at a neg 4.4. So what we're really saying is that channel is a 4.4 receive, neg 4.4 receive coming into this point, and it's leaving at a neg 16.9. What that means is that once it hits this ROTAM, it peters out enough that by the time it gets to this WCC card, it's a worthless channel. Of course, we can send a guy out there with a truck, if this were a remote site, to get a look at that light level wise, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm pulled out my handy power meter here, and I'm going to go to that WCC card and see what light is actually hitting that card. So it's 1.8. I have that is a neg 23.1 hitting that point. So neg 23.1 is hitting here. So what's leaving that ROTAM is a neg 16, but then it's getting degraded by at least 5 dB between these 2 points. So then I'm getting a neg 23.1 as it hits this guy here. So what I'm going to need to do is initiate the protection process on here, because that light level actually should be lower. And so I'm going to go ahead and start building my protection, but I want to find out more about the light that's coming out of this EDFA first. So at 117, the light that's leaving that EDFA is 0.4 dB. That's actually a little low. Received into it is neg 24. So what I'm going to need to do is go to 117 and lighten up some of the padding that's on that one. See if I can't squeeze more light out of the front end and perhaps bring this up to an acceptable level. Okay, I've replaced all the attenuation on 117.1 with simply a 10 dB pad. This should resolve our problem. So we'll wait a few seconds and see what happens. We're not counting defect seconds. That ADVA appears to have gone happy. Now we're in the ADVA's sweet spot, around a neg 16. So let's reset each of these defect timers and each of these PM monitors. And we'll give it a few moments and see what happens in the system. Conditions went away. And how about with those ADVAs? No current conditions standing. I think the ADVA actually may be hung, and the information we may be looking at may actually be old. So let's try something different with that ADVA. I'm going to bounce the ADVA by re-initting it. Service affecting reinitialization. This is going to light up red. As that ADVA restarts, everything witnessed by that ADVA should also take a hit right along with it. But this is basically a code reboot of that ADVA. Presently, that ADVA is telling me it's got no troubles. However, it's also telling me it's busy doing stuff. But what it's doing is kind of a mystery at the moment. Let's see if we can't modify this ADVA's gain. To modify gain on any ADVA, we'd first change its state to management. Then we go to the configuration and we modify it. Oh, this... Well, it's not the gain is not manageable when auto span equalization has been initiated. And so that's kind of something I had forgotten to mention. My apologies. But this also prompts us to look into the span equalization and see if anything unusual has happened here. There's our 117. 117 says he's in an abnormal state. Says span equalization gain out of range, it's low. So it's saying the low on that ADVA is our problem. So we can try to modify it from here. So we need to first set the state. We need to knock it down to maintenance. Once we've knocked it down to maintenance, we should gain the ability to modify our offset. I'm going to change my offset to simply 1. Once I've done that, I'll go ahead and try to reinitialize equalization. I'll move the card back out of maintenance state and back into in service. Now equalize again. Initially, basically forcing equalization to see if that doesn't help the circumstance or modify or correct the problem. And it doesn't look like it is. So still out of range and low. Then we need to follow up. Span equalization calculated gain is 20. So let's do some changing here. Modify, maintenance, We'll turn off the dynamicness. I'll try to operate one more time here. Still can't modify it with auto equalization running. Now we can set our gain. This ADVA is a higher gain ADVA, so let's give it 22.0 dB of gain. We'll leave it in the management state. We'll go back to span equalization. We'll requalify these ADVAs, including this one. Then we'll relaunch the equalization process. And then we'll set it back for dynamic equalization. The management state will go back to automatic in service and let the machine dictate when it's to be in service. Oh, better yet, I'll just set it in service. No standing conditions at all on that ADVA. So right now, the only issues reported by it are being reported by the equalization process. And so technically this shelf is still in a very happy state. I'm going to go back after the thresholds that were crossed here.